Hello, hello, Jordan Chariton again, live Status Coup, post-election day in the United Corporations of America. I was live on my drive back from Philadelphia, so you could watch that live stream where I gave you my takeaways on the election, which we're going to go into extensively, more in depth on this stream. Joining me in a few minutes will be Zeynab. She's a progressive political journalist and friend of the coup. So she will join me as we react to Vice President Kamala Harris, who looks like she's going to be walking on stage to make her formal concession speech soon. So we'll react live to Harris's speech. I don't know if we're going to play the whole thing, but we'll certainly play a lot of it. And then I'm going to go through the most cringe reactions to Donald Trump's presidential victory that I believe tell the true story on why we can't have nice things in this country and why we have the never ending corporate neoliberal status quo that we have. So smash the like button, share this live stream if you can. Sharing is caring. Thank you to everybody who watched last night. We were on the ground across the country. I was on the ground in Philadelphia, almost got in a bar fight, which was fun. And Tina Desiree Berg was live for us in Las Vegas. Trump won Pennsylvania and Nevada. He also won Michigan, Wisconsin. Looks like across the board, he won all of the 7 swing states. Nevada, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. The numbers are not final yet. Some were closer than others. It also looks like Republicans took back the Senate and are going to keep the House. So Donald Trump will have complete control. So we'll talk about it all. And Harris, we believe, is going to go on stage any minute. But while I'm waiting for Harris to speak, smash that like button, share this live stream so we can get it out to as many people as possible. There's a lot to get to, and there's a lot of people with a lot of hot takes. But I think this will likely be one of the more substantive reactions that you will see. So let me just retweet this because I got to do it all here. Hold on. All right. So while we're waiting for Harris to go out there, I wanted to show a couple things. Let's start with a clip that was on CNN. Colin, if you have that, the CNN analyst says Democrats should have listened to.
Give me just what I had mentioned. I got to
Oh,
run.
right. Okay, never
Give
mind.
me just
Tell me,
1 minute. I can grab those.
yeah. Tell me when you have it. All right. So in the meantime, we are already seeing the blame game of the Democratic Party, not reacting to the fact that this was a mass rejection of the Democratic Party, of its economic policy, of the crumbs that they have provided. But we're seeing members of Harris's campaign and others blame Biden for not getting out sooner, for running for re-election in the first place. They seem to think the problem was that they didn't have time for an actual Democratic primary, that they didn't have the right candidate, and that Harris didn't have enough time to run. Well, according to the exit polls, that wasn't the problem. I don't know, given the exit polls of what people said mattered to them, and given the fact that I think most of the Democrats that would have run if it wasn't Harris would have run on similar economic proposals, which were basically more of the same neoliberal tax credits, crumbs. I think the same thing would have happened, because the bottom line is, if you actually look at the exit polls, and I did a whole thread on Twitter about this earlier, if you want to go to that cesspool of a website, the bottom line is, if you look at the numbers, 75% of voters said inflation had severe or moderate impact on their lives. 75% of all voters said the inflation had severe or moderate impact. 73% of voters said they were dissatisfied or angry about the way things were going. 67% of voters said the economy is not good. or poor, which is in very stark contrast, very, very stark contrast to the bullshit spin we get on a never-ending basis.
Oh, I have that clip also whenever you're ready for it.
Yeah, which is in very, very stark contrast to the never-ending bullshit spin we get from CNN, MSNBC, CNBC, the New York Times. The economy is great. The unemployment number is low and the stock market's booming and GDP is going. That's not the economy. That is not the real economy. That is what Wall Street considers the economy. That is not what people are dealing with in reality, the kind of people that I cover all the time on the ground. All right. We're still waiting for Harris to come out. Like I said, Zayna will be joining me. Colin, make sure you sent the link to her, by the way. Let's watch. I found this very, very instructive clip on CNN today.
I think this is the leftovers of the 2016 kind of mess, that there were all of these issues that the Democratic Party saw laid out very clearly in 2016 after Hillary Clinton's loss, and that rather than address those issues, they moved and they migrated. What happened is that the pandemic, right? The pandemic came upon us, and Joe Biden happened to be the person for the pandemic. And I think they mistook that moment for a referendum on what the Democrats had to offer, rather than being introspective. I'll tell you one other person who I think is going to be incredibly important, actually two other people. The first person is Bernie Sanders. One of the things that Bernie Sanders has been saying since at least 2014 has been about how the Democratic Party, if it wants to keep these coalitions, needs to talk about bread and butter issues. It needs to talk about politics. A lot of people attacked him for that, saying, well, are you saying that cultural politics don't matter? That's not what he was saying. He was saying we need to focus on these things. The other person is Stacey Abrams. We have not heard a lot from Stacey Abrams in this election cycle, but her organizations, particularly Fair Fight, the New Georgia Voter Project, and other organizations were instrumental in pulling together coalitions that ended up winning Joe Biden Georgia in 2020, but also Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin.
Not this time.
So I say this, I show you this clip, and we're going to have more clips. Wait till you see. Wait till you see. Wait till you see these Morning Joe clips. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. These Morning Joe clips from this morning. I present you that clip not to slobber over Bernie Sanders, who, of course, a lot of people are frustrated with. I have always said I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I appreciate everything Bernie Sanders has done for the left. I don't agree with what he has done in the Biden administration. I don't agree with his stance and position during the Biden administration. He said, get rid of Trump and we'll fight to move Biden left on day one. That has not happened. But with that said, there is no doubt about it. Bernie Sanders, his campaign out of nowhere in 2016 and then 2020 became a major thing because whether you loved him or hate him, he wasn't offering small ball neoliberal crumbs. He wasn't offering to change the curtains. He wasn't offering to change the side dishes. He was going after the main meal: Medicare for all, free college, Green New Deal, reviving labor unions, banning fracking, whatever it was. And he was talking to economic issues. Some might say he ignored more cultural, social issues. So be it. He was going to what matters, which is this country has been looted. We've had a 40-year bank robbery, and all the money has gone from the middle and lower income all the way to the top. That's what he was running on. And I got to tell you, when I was on the ground in 2016, I've said this many times, Bernie Sanders, for Trump voters, when I asked them who would be your second choice, I can't tell you how many Trump voters told me Bernie Sanders. Not because they loved everything about him, but they thought he was authentic, and they agreed with him on trade and that against the offshoring of jobs. A lot of them agreed with universal health care. So the bottom line is the Democratic Party, and you could pop in Zayna whenever, Colin. the Democratic Party basically, there she is. Joining us now, returning champion Zayna Day. She has a Substack that is brand new, and you should all join. It is the what bulletin?
Bullhorn.
Bullhorn bulletin.
Like megaphone, bullhorn.
wearing a fancy hat, ready to go to the Kentucky Derby. So
I'm going for the old cat lady look more and more.
But you're not, but not the childless cat lady of Vice President-elect Vance.
Not yet.
Okay. So you just tuned in, and by the way, we're waiting to hear from Harris. So when she starts speaking, we'll pipe in. But I showed a clip where a genius on CNN said, you know what? Since to give Zaynab benefit of the doubt, let's play this clip one more time, Colin, so she could see it. The CNN clip. Okay, he might have gone to the bathroom. All right, so CNN had somebody on that basically said they think the results is kind of the shrapnel or last remaining vestiges of the 2016 election. And they said the Democratic Party should have listened more to Bernie Sanders, who talked about bread and butter economic issues. And obviously that attracted not just leftists, it attracted a lot of more conservative people. But in my view, I tweeted this 2-3 weeks ago, Kamala Harris is literally running, literally all caps, Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. Only she's doing it further to the right because she's going around politically prostituting herself with Liz Cheney, of all people. At least Hillary Clinton didn't do that. She offered some kind of incremental neoliberal tax credits and things like that, but zero bold policy. I remember we did our on the ground reporting trip. We were driving around on the swing states. I kept seeing billboards. Kamala Harris supports the raising the minimum wage. I said, to what? I said, to what? Kamala Harris supports raising the minimum wage. To what amount and how? How are you going to do it? So I believe that, listen, in fairness to her, she did only have 100 days to run. I want to be fair. That's also the fault of the Democratic Party because they undemocratically just handed it to her rather than having a mini primary. I don't know if anyone in 100 days could have done that much better. I think a progressive could have. But the point is, she ended up running the same campaign of Hillary, which is Trump's a fascist, stop the bad man, and here's some, kind of tax credits and crumbs. And by the exit polls, I mean, I tweeted it out earlier. It's not a shocker. 75% of voters said inflation had either moderately or severely harmed them.
Yeah.
67% said they're worse off than they were economically. Well, if you don't have a specific plan, anything bold to counteract that, and frankly, I think Biden hurt her because there are things Biden could have done, Zayna, to lower prices that he refused to do. So the floor is yours before Kamala comes out.
Well, it's really interesting that you said you heard that last night because I was watching CNN and I heard an anchor or one of the panelists say that.
Wait a minute. Why were you watching CNN and not Status Coup? What the fuck?
This was after everybody went to bed. I was on CashApp Pod last night with Layla. I'm sorry.
Okay. That's fine. Go ahead.
Or Lila and Pat. I was on with them last night. But I did drop in for a little while to check out what you guys were doing too. Great coverage. And I watched CNN, so I was up way too late. This was like 4 a.m. They were still going. And one of the panelists said that we're going to hear this mythology essentially she said, what we're going to hear is we're going to hear that it was the economy. And we're going to hear that if Kamala had run to the left, like had more of a Bernie Sanders type platform, similar to what she had in 2019, that she would have done far better. And she said, I don't buy that. She said she just wasn't war ready.
Oh, God.
That was her whole analysis, was she just wasn't war ready. And that was it. That's all she said. So, but I agree with you that when you look at this race, Harris didn't even come out with a platform until she was already almost 60, 75 days in. People were saying, what are you running on? If she had came out right out of the gate, healthcare for all, that includes, she could have wrapped into that, bodily autonomy. She could have wrapped into that reproductive rights, right? If she would have run on, because if you look at Obama, you look at Bill Clinton, they ran, even though inauthentically, they ran on leftist policies, right? They ran on a living wage. They ran on tuition-free college. Even Biden ran on tuition-free college. Obama ran on tuition-free college. And of course, he gutted that system. But that's a whole other story. But they ran on it, and she wouldn't even do the effort to run on these issues at all. And she was specific in some of the policies she wanted to get passed, but they were a drop in the bucket. $25,000 tax credits. So, tax deductibles. $25,000 tax deductible. That means that somebody would already have to have $25,000 down to get that deduced, to get that deducted. They would already have to have that $25,000. So a lot of her economic plan didn't help the most impoverished. And when you adjust for inflation, upwards of anywhere from 18 to 25% of the country is in poverty. And those that are above that poverty line are still just barely floating by with 1,000 to 500 in the bank for emergencies. And what's $1,000 going to get you now with an emergency? That can't get you very far.
Can I, and we might get cut off while she comes on stage, but I want to go back a little further, because I actually think the results of tonight or last night, and by the way, I just want to point out, I tweeted this also. Isn't it interesting, Zayna, that all the Stop the Steal people that grifted off of Stop the Steal, suddenly they're quiet? I guess there's no election fraud if Trump wins. Everything's free and fair if their cult leader wins. So if you're a MAGA person watching and you think the election was rigged 4 years ago, tell me it's not rigged now because he won. Is that it? Just putting that out there.
It is hypocrisy.
It's not even hypocrisy. It's moral bankruptcy. It just shows the whole thing was a complete grift. Okay. I want to move back because I think the results actually were cemented 4 years ago. And what I mean by that, I said 4 years ago, I think you might have been on with me, there's something off with Joe Biden before he won. I said, I'm not a doctor, but it sure seems to me he's not at his best. He's forgetting Obama's name. He's calling himself an Obama Democrat? He's forgetting where he is. This is not a stutter. Oh, all right. Here she's starting. So we'll stop and start.
Thank you all. Thank you. So let me say, and I love you back. So let me say, my heart is full today. Full of gratitude for the trust you have placed in me, full of love for our country, and full of resolve. The outcome of this election is not what we wanted, not what we fought for, not what we voted for, but hear me when I say, the light of America's promise will always burn bright.
Ugh. America's promise.
As we never give up, and as long as we keep fighting.
This sounds like an 8th grader wrote this speech for like a speech class.
Real quick, it sounds to me like she's basically launching the Resistance 2.0 right now. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
President Biden and Dr. Biden, thank you for your faith and support. To Governor Walz and the Walz family, I know your service to our nation will continue. And to my extraordinary team, to the volunteers who gave so much of themselves, to the poll workers and the local election officials, I thank you all.
I just want to say real quick, and this is not because I love Harris, but we should just say it. Trump beat Hillary Clinton. She came out in less than 24 hours and conceded the election. Trump beat Kamala Harris. She's out within less than 24 hours. She conceded the election. I don't think we should normalize the fact that the president-elect still hasn't conceded that he lost. And, I mean, the only reason we're not having riots and more violence is because he won. So
Right.
we shouldn't just pigeonhole and memory hole that. That's not democratic, even though we do not have a democracy.
Yeah.
And we did it with the knowledge that we all have so much more in common than what separates us. Now, I know folks are feeling and experiencing a range of emotions right now. I get it. But we must accept the results of this election. Earlier today, I spoke with President-elect Trump and congratulated him on his victory. I also told him that we will help him and his team with their transition, and that we will engage in a peaceful transfer of power. A fundamental principle of American democracy is that when we lose an election, we accept the results. That principle, as much as any other, distinguishes democracy from monarchy or tyranny. And anyone who seeks the public trust must honor it. At the same time, in our nation, we owe loyalty not to a president or a party, but to the Constitution of the United States. And loyalty to our conscience and to our God. My allegiance to all three is why I am here to say, while I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign. The fight.
What fight?
The fight for freedom, for
You said what fight, right?
What fight? Yeah, what were they fighting for? It's not really clear.
fight for the ideals at the heart of our nation. The ideals that reflect America at our best. That is a fight I will never give up. I will never give up the fight for a future where Americans can pursue their dreams, ambitions, and aspirations, where the women of America have the freedom to make decisions about their own body and not have their government telling them what to do.
I'd love to ask you, because obviously I don't have the parts. What I always found very interesting, of course, I understand women who would vote for her on the abortion issue. I get it. But she never expressed how she was actually going to restore Roe v. Wade. She said, I'm for removing the filibuster, but Biden said he was for a $15 minimum. Like, she never actually said, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to get Roe v. Wade restored. And I asked women in my life, like, is it enough that she shares your values? Because she's not actually communicating how she's going to do it, or if she's going to fight to do it. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
I feel like it's that carrot that the Democratic Party dangles out in front of us every election cycle. Since even before the reversal of Roe v. Wade, they told us they were going to codify it, right? And so we've been having this carrot dangled out, and only 8% of the country support restrictive abortion laws. Only 8%. And so it's highly unpopular, restrictive abortion laws. But the reason that I think the huge piece that's missing here is that 65% of the races were uncontested. And I talked to you earlier about this. And a lot of those states where the draconian anti-LGBT laws are happening, the anti-choice laws are happening, is states that the Democratic Party abandoned when they abandoned the 50-state strategy. And this election, they left more than half the country uncontested, meaning that the only choice on the ballot for people in those states for most of their state house seats was Republican.
Right.
So how can you claim to be fighting those laws when you're not even running people in those states?
Right. Let me get back to her.
To the young people who are watching, it is okay to feel sad and disappointed, but please know it's going to be okay. On the campaign, I would often say, when we fight, we win. But here's the thing. Sometimes the fight takes a while. That doesn't mean we won't win. The important thing is don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. Don't ever stop trying to make the world a better place. You have power. You have power. And don't you ever listen when anyone tells you something is impossible because it has never been done before. You have the capacity to do extraordinary good in the world. And so to everyone who is watching, do not despair. This is not a time to throw up our hands. This is a time to roll up our sleeves. This is a time to organize, to mobilize, and to stay engaged for the sake of freedom and justice and the future that we all know we can build together. Look, many of you know
the Obama
I started
hand
out
gestures
as a
down.
prosecutor, and throughout my career, I saw people at some of the worst times in their lives. People who had suffered great harm and great pain, and yet found within themselves the strength and the courage and the resolve to take the stand, to take a stand.
I just want to be clear, when she says take a stand, she literally reversed the few good policy proposals she had. She reversed all of them.
Yeah.
Literally, when she was running in 2019, first of all, she signed on to Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All 5 minutes before she ran for president. Then she launched her campaign on Medicare for All. But then when the donors and the media pressured her, she literally reversed herself on Medicare for All within 48 hours.
Yeah, it was staggering.
So that's what we're talking. When she says stand your ground and fight, she reversed her whatever the hell she said she stood for, which I'm not even sure she actually believed it then. She reversed herself very quickly.
Fracking. Then she said trans rights would be decided through the state law.
I hope that is not the case. But here's the thing, America, if it is, let us fill the sky with the light of a brilliant, brilliant billion of stars. The light of optimism, of faith, of truth and service. HU. And may that work guide us, even in the face of setbacks, toward the extraordinary promise of the United States of America. I thank you all. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. I thank you all.
We could get rid of that, Colin. So, I want to be fair, and why I keep saying I want to be fair, I think if Kamala Harris had ran a primary and won the Democratic nomination, which I don't actually think she would have, I'm pretty convinced based on the exit polls, she still would have lost. But with that said, she did only have 100 days to run the campaign. But with also, I should also say, she had more money from wealthy donors than any candidate in the history of America. They're reporting, Zayna, that between Harris and Trump, $10 billion was spent,
Yes.
which is obscene. So she had the money, which I don't think you need the corporate money to compete, but that's a different story. The bottom line is, in my view, based on the exit polls, and I've already told you the highlights, 75% of Americans who voted said inflation had either severely or moderately hurt them. 67% of Americans said they were worse off economically than 4 years ago. I don't think it's a small thing, and these might not be the final numbers, but 3% less age 18 to 29 voted. So that's Gen Z and some of the millennials, a 3% drop in youth turnout, and Harris was down 5% compared to Biden among 18 to 29. I would cite Gaza for that. Yeah. I don't think Gaza was the defining reason she lost. I certainly don't think it helped. I should also say Donald Trump, who reportedly has told Benjamin Netanyahu, do whatever you need to do. He won Dearborn, Michigan. He got 42% of the vote in Dearborn, Michigan. And I'm not going to second guess people who are in mourning and in terror, Arab Americans living in Dearborn. I understand a protest vote because Biden and Harris are currently providing the check. But when I hear her speak, somebody said it in the chat, Zayna, it's just a platitude word salad.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, what was she offering other than fascist? I'll try to meet Republicans where they are. And economically, here's some tax credits.
That was it. She ran on deregulation, also of the housing market. She kind of ran on. Yimbys were very excited for a moment, but we're talking about the corporate captured ones. And so that was actually that was a hit to her campaign because what she was suggesting, she didn't have any model for to prevent gentrification. So people in the cities that have been impacted by that type of gentrification, that was a huge, there was a lot of clapback that wasn't really covered by mainstream media on that particular policy when she came out with it. So that is so much money spent on a campaign that it really is staggering. Spent on campaigns. We're like,
they say we could end homelessness for $20 billion, and $10 billion was spent on this presidential campaign.
Yeah, we're in a new era that's very similar to post-industrial age. We're basically living in 1926 right now, right before the Great Depression. And we have our modern Vanderbilts, right? We've got the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks, and it's very similar. We've got our own Carnegies now. But in those, people are pouring into the elections, very similar. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And I think we're seeing that because we saw a lot being pulled into elections way back then for Coolidge and others. I think that we're seeing similar parallels. But for Kamala, I just don't think she reached people. She didn't give us anything. If you're going to come out of it's like I said earlier, if you're going to come out of the gate, you've only got 100 days. You should bust out with some bold policy immediately, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think also something we should look at the numbers a little bit closer, because I think one of the reasons Trump won, the top reason was the economy. And we're about to play, buckle up for this series of Morning Joe clips. that we have for you.
Oh no.
I almost popped out of bed this morning, and if I had a rock, I would have thrown it at the TV. But you got to look within the numbers. Trump got 45% of Latinos. He won.
Yeah.
He won Latino men. Well, what is the Democratic? I mean, you know better than I. You worked you worked for some Democratic campaigns. Basically, the Democratic Party's entire messaging to Latinos has been on immigration. They thought that's what Latinos care about. Well, apparently Latinos, like white people, like black people, they all shit the same way. They all put their pants on the same way. They all work like the rest of us, and they don't only care about one issue. And what was what was Harris's and the Democratic Party's messaging to Latinos? We passed the border bill, a right-wing border bill, by the way, and Trump sabotaged it. Well, that's assuming that's the number one issue they care about. It's not. For a portion of them, that's a number one issue.
That doesn't even distinguish her from Trump, really, on this issue,
Right.
other than rhetoric. Like, people understand that Trump's rhetoric is abhorrent, but they're looking at actual policy because they saw that their lives were actually better when he was, that's just terrible to say, but when he was president, their lives were better in some material way. So that's what they look at. They're like, yeah, his rhetoric can't stand him. Like, that rhetoric's awful. And then they're like, but my life.
Right.
And I'd say that's similar for a lot of Latino people, too. I wouldn't be surprised.
And by the way, voters don't vote on context. They don't vote on, well, there's more to it. So there is more to inflation, okay? It's a worldwide thing. And also, there was corporate price gouging. However, as I talked about in my earlier live stream, there were specific things Biden and Harris, but specifically Biden, could have done to lower gas prices. There were specific things they could have done to lower food prices. There is something they could have done for the last 40 years to lower housing and gentrification. Stop selling out the government to real estate developers and donors. We've had a 40-year inflation. It's called gentrification. Okay? So, but they didn't do that. And Biden sent sternly worded letters to fossil fuel companies, sternly saying, I expect you to lower the prices. Shocker, they didn't. He could have said, hey, we give you $15 billion in free subsidies. I'm cutting those subsidies by the end of the week if you don't lower prices. The end. That's what JFK did with U.S. Steel in 1962, and U.S. Steel folded. He could have done the same exact thing with the food industry. They could pass laws to stop Wall Street from buying up all the housing in America and then doubling the price, which is why we have a housing affordability crisis. But they're not going to do that because Wall Street is providing the $10 billion for the ads. So I could go on, but there's a lot of reasons Kamala Harris lost. But the core problem is I think the core problem is this. Colin, let's play some of these Morning Joe clips. I don't know what order you have them in, but there were staggering things said. I'm not surprised because these are all limousine liberals on Morning Joe. And by the way, I want to give shout outs. We got a new Status Coup members, Robert, Lewis, Amanda, and Mindy. Thank you. We need you. No offense to our friends. We were the only ones on the ground across the country. I was in Philly on the ground. I almost got in a bar fight, which we'll talk about later. And Tina was on the ground for us in Nevada. And we have other interviews that we recorded from both that we'll be posting over the next few days. It costs a lot of money. I got to pay for my cameraman, Tina's cameraman, hotels, food, you get it. Support us, statuscoup.com/join. Thank you. $50 donation from Philip, $5 donation from Jess. Okay, let's play the Morning Joe clips.
Groceries cost in 2024 compared to 2020 had an impact on voters, and Hispanic voters, white voters, black voters, all voters.
It had an impact about 4 or 5 times larger than the abortion ruling did, Joe, because the Democrats somehow have forgotten the lived economy of their citizens, of the people they represent. The lived economy occurs in grocery stores. It occurs at gas stations. Every single day, you see people filling up their tanks half full because of the cost of gas. You see people cutting back on groceries because of the cost of groceries. And yet the Democrats kept talking and talking and talking about this booming economy, the strongest economy in the world, which it is. But it's not the lived economy of their constituents who lived it every day, and many of them suffered through it every day.
Mike Barnicle has been saying this over and over and over again. He's been the only logical voice in this whole thing, and he's right.
Colin, if we had more money and resources, I'd love if you could have live orange flames coming out of my head and ears. Zaina,
You think they'll learn a lesson from this, though? That's one of the questions I have. You know, are they going to learn from this?
well, first of all, respectfully to Mike Barnicle, who maybe did say that several times, I have been screaming this for 10 years, Zaina.
Me
That
too, buddy.
well, you longer than I, because you've been in this longer. CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNBC and all these fucking politicians on both sides, because Republicans do it too when they're in office, and spin, well, the economy's booming, unemployment is low, and the stock market's at record highs, and GDP, and, I just bought a new pillow and it was on sale. The economy's booming. First of all, when's the last time any anchor on CNN or MSNBC had to fill up their gas tank half full because they couldn't afford to fill it up full? The people, the gatekeepers, Zaina, that provide the information, they're all disconnected from actually the people they're supposed to be providing the information to. They have absolutely no idea. And frankly, I don't think Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski give a fuck, really, about that lived economy. Because to them, it's all about the horse race and politics and who's up and who's down and their friends. But the reality is, the economy in America hasn't been good really since the 1960s. And what I mean by the economy is actual egalitarianism, economic equality.
Yeah,
The
and I
economy-
think our chat is capturing this really well, because they're saying, it was about vibes, it was about joy, it was about rhetoric. The Democratic Party, the Dems have focused and liberals have focused so hard on rhetoric and feels, so hard on, I hate to use the word identity politics because I don't believe that, because I do believe that racism exists. I do believe that there are real systemic issues, but they don't talk about the systemic issues. They focus on rhetoric. They build everything off of three different things: assumption of what the voting demographic and the people are when they're so out of touch, like you said, they don't even care. They're in another universe than we are. They really are. They live in a completely different universe than the everyday working person. I mean, these are people that can get nannies and that, have their landscaped and have, 14-room houses and stuff. These are people that are so detached from, they don't even buy their own groceries most of the time. So they don't know anything about what it's like to live a day-to-day life. There's an assumption of what people want that liberals arrogantly make. They put us all, like you said earlier, into a monolith. All Muslims think the same. All Latin people think the same. All, poor people in Appalachia are all just toothless rednecks, sitting on their front porch spitting backer. You know what I mean? And then they tokenize us with rhetoric, and that's it. People are a lot smarter. Voters are actually smarter than the Democratic Party gives them credit for. They're smart people. They understand their pocketbooks. They understand that the stock market's BS. Most of them can't invest in stocks and bonds. They're tired of hearing about the unemployment rate because they're working 2 to 3 jobs, mostly gig work, just trying to make ends meet. So, that's what it is. It's feels. It's like the chat kept saying. It's feels and vibes and They're running on assumptions, and we're tired. I think people are just tired of the smugness, tired of the elitism, tired of the, not speaking to us. And I think a lot of people felt like, I can't stand Trump. I'm just being honest. I think a lot of people felt like he was more relatable, which is insane because he's a out of touch millionaire or billionaire, millionaire, whatever he is, clown. But he spoke to people in a way that he didn't degrade them. He didn't condescend. He spoke to their issues. He let people from his audience at his rallies come up and speak about the cost of hot dogs. And people saw that.
I think it's a lot simpler than the elitism and this and that. I think it's very simple. What do they say? The rent is too damn high. I think people just said, even though there's a lot of context for it, and I don't think the economy was particularly great under Trump, because again, the economy that they say is great is not the lived economy. But I think people just say, hey, prices were lower under Trump. Yeah, I might think he's a pig, but things were cheaper. So I'm going to go back to him.
That $2,000 check that he got right before he left office, too, had a big impact. And then Biden came in, and I don't know if you remember this, but I've heard so many people in their exit interviews talking about this, which is anecdotal, but I'm hearing people talk about this, and people you have interviewed talked about this a lot. And that was the child tax loan that Biden gave. Remember that? And the child tax loan that he gave replaced the $2,000 tax credit that was supposed to go to everyone. And this loan only went to parents. And then we went to do our taxes and we were slapped with, you have to pay this back. And that wasn't made clear when people received this because Biden had promised that it was just going to be a credit. And instead it was a loan. People remember that, man. People are still salty over that because that.
Wait, are you saying that the child tax credit that they said reduced poverty in half was not, you had to pay back?
Mm-hmm.
That's news to me. I didn't know that.
Yeah, you had to. So people went to do their taxes at the height. It's not funny. It's horrible. But at the height of like COVID, when Biden first got in office and sent us all those checks, when they went that, right after January to file their taxes, people were getting hit with having to try to pay that back.
Oh, you're saying they were taxed on the check that they got?
Oh, no, the check was just a loan. So when you went to do your taxes, you had to pay that $1,500, whatever, $2,000, $2,500, $3,000 back. So if you had a child tax credit, it came out of your child tax credit that you got at the end of the year.
Oh, I see.
If you didn't get a child tax credit because, maybe you're doing gig work and your pay was too high and they miscalculated because they miscalculated a lot of people's credit on that, you had to pay additional money in that you didn't have. Because they sent that check without explaining what it was.
So let me make sure I have it right. Basically, if you got the $1,400 check from Biden, which was supposed to be $2,000, but they somehow crunched the numbers in a neoliberal way. If you got that, and then you were eligible for the child tax credit, the $1,400 check was deducted out of your child tax credit. So you got less. You got less of the child tax credit. I have that right?
Yes.
And that ding, 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 ding is the problem. Yeah.
If somehow you were a sole proprietorship and let's say that you made too much to be eligible for the full child tax credit or whatever, you had to pay whatever that was additional back.
But can I make a broader point? And I started to say this before Kamala came on, and I'm sorry if I'm long-winded, but I actually think the 2020 race is partly responsible for what has happened here. I said 4 years ago, Zayna, I don't remember if you were on at that time, but I said, it's very clear that Biden shouldn't be running. I'm not a doctor, but he's got early something. He was forgetting Obama's name. He was slurring his words. It was not a stutter because when he was a senator and when he was vice president, he wasn't having these issues. I mean, I had a mild stutter as a kid. You grow out of it. It was something is not cognitively there. It was evident in 2020, but he ran because of his ego and bravo, whatever. And then literally to stop the tyranny of a guy running on Medicare for all, free college, saving the planet, they put forth someone who clearly was not capable, I think, of running and serving and running for re-election. Let's point that. They were running someone who was already old, but was cognitively not at his best. Whatever you want to say, I'm not going to diagnose it. So they did that all to stop Bernie Sanders. And we know we don't need to relitigate. Obama got everyone to drop out at the last minute. You know, Bernie was on the 5-yard line and the establishment got in to stop Bernie. Okay. But then Biden, he ran. A lot of people got the wrong message from 2020, in my opinion, Zayna. Biden didn't win by that much. If not for COVID, I think Biden was going to lose. The only reason Biden won, and if you look at the Electoral College, he won by a very small amount in the swing states that put him over, was because Donald Trump badly mismanaged a deadly pandemic that was the first year. And he paid for it. And that's why Biden won. He didn't win because people were embracing Democratic Party neoliberalism. I also think it happened to help that he ran on some concrete specific proposals, even though clearly he didn't mean them. He ran on a $15 minimum wage. He ran on a public option. Those were basic. That's all he ran on, basically. But I think you could blame Harris, and you should, but I believe we're sitting having a much different conversation today, Zayna, if Biden would have passed a $15 minimum wage, which he could have done in the COVID relief bill. Let's be clear. The parliamentarian, is not an elected position. It's an advisory hack. Donald Trump fired his parliamentarian, which is a Senate. Donald Trump fired his Senate parliamentarian when the Senate parliamentarian said, no, you cannot, according to Senate rules, pass your tax cut for the rich through the reconciliation process. He just fired him and did it anyway. Joe Biden did not have to listen, nor did Chuck Schumer have to listen to the Senate parliamentarian when they said, yeah, you can't add the $15 minimum wage to the COVID relief bill. He didn't have to. They're not elected. It's an advisory. It's not a binding position. He did that, Zayna, because they didn't want to pass the $15 minimum wage because their donors don't want a $15 minimum wage. It's the donors. We live in the United Corporations of America. Second, as soon as he was elected, did you hear him mention the word public option once?
No.
Okay. So child tax credit. I didn't know about that pay back the loan, but putting that aside, he didn't even fight. They set all of these his highest approval rating, Zayna, was after the COVID relief bill because they actually put some things in there that helped people. That was Biden's highest approval rating. I think the child tax credit, does it go for, I want universal guaranteed jobs. Okay. Child tax credit doesn't go far enough for me, but we could call a spade a spade. It's a good thing. It did help a lot of working class people, low income people, single mothers. They set it for a year. Why did you do that? He would say, well, that's the only way we could have got Joe Manchin's vote. I'm sorry, Zayna. Is there something called the bully pulpit of the presidency? Can you not go out and hold a press conference shaming Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema? Can you not hold rallies shaming, tarring, and feathering these ghouls? And you want to know something? Joe Manchin, eventually, he would have buckled. But he never had to experience that kind of pressure because the president of the United States wouldn't do it. And you know why he wouldn't?
Them to have a rotating villain.
Exactly. So I believe, Zayna, correct me if I'm wrong, yes, inflation was a big deal, but if he would have passed the $15 minimum wage, if they would have actually fought to extend that child tax credit, he didn't. I think we're sitting here talking about President Harris. I really do. I think even those two things, you could argue, well, the $15 minimum wage, prices would have went up. Okay. Point is, if they did some bold things that were permanent, I think we're having a much different discussion.
Yeah, I agree. I do think, though, I think the economy is coupled with, I think it kind of goes in tandem with our war spending. And Trump did present himself as anti-war, even though we hear what he's saying because we're dialed in and we understand Trump's relationship with Netanyahu. The way he says it could be interpreted a lot of different ways. He came out saying that Israel had gone too far in one of his first interviews after Harris announced, or maybe it was right before Biden dropped out. I think it may have been right before the debate. He had said that he went too far and should be held accountable, for harming people in an interview. He did say that. So, and then he said a bunch of racist things about Palestinians and stuff too. So I'm not absolving that. But he's also saying that he's going to work with leaders like in Russia to help in the war in Ukraine. So we stop spending money there. there was polling that did show that along with the economy slice that we see, it was the war expenses that people were upset about. That those were coupled together because we're spending billions and billions and billions on war, just like we did in Iraq, just like Afghanistan, and people are tired of it. They couple that with, why aren't we doing spending here in the US? Why is this money going abroad? Why isn't it at home? So that war spending a lot of times is coupled, I've noticed in the polling, with the economy. For people that's going hand in hand. It's not two separate issues. They know that it's holistic and combined.
And to be clear, and Democrats don't make this argument because they can't make this argument, Zayna, because they're doing the same thing. The military went up. The military spending went up under Donald Trump too.
Yeah.
Donald Trump armed Ukraine. People like to forget about that. He gave weapons to Ukraine. Donald Trump bombed Syria twice. American bases around the world expanded under Donald Trump. Donald Trump, most people don't know this, tripled the amount of droning we do around the world. So Donald Trump is not the peace candidate. I interviewed Jana, and my head almost exploded. 2 18-year-olds last night. One of them told me he voted for Donald Trump because he's funny. And the other one told me he voted for Donald Trump because he's the peace candidate. Against my better judgment. Well, no, I think I didn't want to push back too hard on 2 18-year-olds. Give them the benefit of the doubt. They don't really know much. And they told me they get their news from Joe Rogan. Well, go figure. So the bottom line is, at the end of the day, the Democratic Party, they had a fundamental choice to make after 2016 when Hillary lost. They chose to blame Russia and move to the right. They didn't have to move. They didn't have to make a choice after 2020 because Biden won, and they were able to put basically a Band-Aid on the gaping gunshot wound because the neoliberal bubble was beginning to pop. And now they have a fundamental choice to make. It's the donors and the corruption and keeping the system intact, which is we're going to continue to offer neoliberal crumbs because we have to keep this corrupt system in place, which is getting money from Wall Street. And by the way, we're talking both parties. Trump got a ton of money from special interests too. Trump is not self-funded. He is just as corrupt as Harris. But they could either keep the status quo because they think the only way we could compete is with billionaire money, or they could recognize, well, maybe the country has changed. Maybe people are tired of neoliberalism, tax credits, public-private partnerships. Maybe people, as I showed, I don't know if you saw this interview, Zayna. I'll show a quick clip. Colin, if you have the tweets I sent you, I went in on my swing state trip, Zayna. Mm-hmm. I went into a National Action Network rally. That's Al Sharpton's group. Not exactly leftists. And I was interviewing several black women, maybe in their 60s. I didn't speak with them before. I assumed they were for Harris. They both told me they were considering Trump. These are lifelong hardcore Democrats. Knocked on the doors for Democrats. Phone bank for Democrats. Gave their the little money they had to Democrats. Bought vote blue no matter who. Not necessarily because they like Trump and not because they were against Harris. They were disgusted by the local and state Democratic Party. They were fed up with the Democratic Party. They were fed up with the gentrification. They were fed up with the broken promises. They were fed up with the same exact record spinning every election. This is the most important election of our lifetime. Eat your vegetables because they're worse than us. Colin, if you could play those. And I wonder, just for you two, psychologically, you've probably been canvassing and busting your butt for the last 20, 30 years for Democrats.
Yes.
So
yes.
It must be kind of like...
It's so disappointing. Mm-hmm. It's like, wow, we've been floating out there for somebody just to find out all these details and information that we didn't have at hand before. And so now that we had this information, you got to stand back and say, wow, our community is not growing, it's not surviving, it's not thriving, it's swindling, it's impoverished, it's crime-ridden, it's not represented.
Everywhere I go, whether it's Detroit, Flint, Cleveland, all these cities, the same pattern is there's like 5 to 10 blocks that are amazing and beautiful. Bars, restaurants, cultural centers, sporting stadiums. And then you drive like 10 minutes down the road and it looks like a third world country in some parts.
You can go to Grosse Pointe. I live 2 blocks from Grosse Pointe. On the opposite side of the street, it's very nice. You look on my side of the street, you see deers and stuff that aren't even supposed to be here. No houses, vegetation that done dwindled away. It's horrible.
Vacant land in war-torn zones.
Right. Because and Grosse Pointe is one of our very exclusive neighborhoods, you know. And I see the work that they do in Grosse Pointe. When that water, when our basement's flooded, I mean flooded and flooded. You know what Grosse Pointe did? They done built them a whole new station in a matter of a year.
Well, did you know that after the Flint water disaster went national, the governor, Snyder at the time, he preemptively replaced all of the lead pipes in Ann Arbor.
Of course.
They didn't have a problem.
Right.
But he took out the pipes. Flint, 10 years later, they still have it. I mean, and people were getting on me, Jordan, you're only looking for people to shit on the Democratic Party. I don't do pre-interviews. I thought they were for Harris. I thought they were for Harris. Do you know how many people I met, black men in Detroit, in Milwaukee, that they either told me they were going to vote for Trump or they were going to leave it blank? So it's not just that people are fed up with or were against Harris. They're fed up with the Democratic Party. And the common pattern, Zayna, and I'm sure you're seeing it where you are too, we just live in a collective tale of two cities. American cities and communities, literally local governments, are selling the government to real estate developers. Your thoughts?
You have mass flight too. It's a different form of gentrification.
Your volume just went down.
Oh, really? Is that better?
Speak.
Can you hear me?
Colin,
Can you hear me?
now I can.
Okay. I must have accidentally tapped my mic. I'm sorry about that. There's different forms of gentrification happening. Some of them are racially targeted. A lot of them are targeting poor areas. You have flight into areas like folks are selling their homes for high dollar in places like that where you can't afford to live in these places. So I don't blame them. But in places like Connecticut and stuff like that, you can sell your homes for $3 million and then move to a place, let's say Somerset, Kentucky. You can buy a beautiful home on the lake for $500,000. But the people here, that $500,000, that's wealthy here. So there's such a massive disparity between the income gaps in the country that it's creating a flood into poor areas where the homes are being bought out, but the pay isn't going up for the people there. And then homes are being bought. And then on top of that, with immigration and Biden, that was a huge issue because in my area, for instance, now there's a 5-year waiting list on public housing, but Biden didn't expand the public housing program because there's caps on how much public housing can be built. So in some of these places, there's a wait now because Biden prioritized migrants, which I'm not against. I am pro-immigration. I was a founder of Abolish ICE. You know this, Jordan. I've been fighting this fight for years. But the problem is that migrants came into these communities and the infrastructure wasn't built for that. And so what it did is he placed a lot of these migrants in poor communities, didn't give the resources for the poor communities to handle the influx of the population. And so then Trump used that grievance then to, spread hostility instead of course, because Republicans don't ever talk about things authentically as they are. But the problem is the distribution of aid for those regions rather than the migrants themselves. The migrants aren't the problem. The problem was if you send a whole bunch of people into a place like Laurel County, which is where I live in Kentucky, and, you bring in, 150 migrant families into the homes here, the government housing here, it pushes it up to a 5-year waiting list. And then the people here are like, we can't get housing either. And then it creates this rift, right, between poor people. And I think people are tired of that. They just want help. at the end of the day. They just don't want to struggle anymore, and they will see things within their own lives, like you keep saying, that are their own material conditions that they're basing their assessments on. And I do think, unfortunately, immigration was a hotbed, one of the hotbed issues, because Biden handled it poorly in that aspect. He didn't handle it correctly, and that doesn't only hurt the people in those areas that are poor, that hurts the migrants as well, because it was flash pan assistance. It wasn't long-term help for them either.
But in my view, and I have an opposite view on immigration. It's not popular among everyone, but I got to be honest. I think it is an extremely exaggerated issue by Republicans. I'm not saying there are not issues, and I don't live on the border. So I'm not saying there aren't issues, because I know there has been some violence and it has affected border towns specifically. With that said, it is as old as history. Find an other. Find someone to blame.
The Irish, the Italians, this is like American pie propaganda. Is when the economy is bad, they point to migrants as the problem.
Right. Because the reality is, and I don't mean this to demean migrants, this is just the truth. Most of the jobs they're taking are the jobs most Americans will not fill. The jobs that the Trump's base is upset about, rightfully so, the jobs that in 2016, I said I think Trump's going to win, because at these rallies in 2016, they're like hyenas listening to him when he's talking about NAFTA. Immigrants didn't take your auto jobs. Immigrants didn't take your steel jobs. Immigrants didn't take your fill in the blank industrial manufacturing jobs. Wall Street took those jobs. Joe Biden sent those jobs. Donald Trump and the Republican Party, all of them together, they are the ones that took your jobs, not immigrants. But the bottom line is, most people, it's not because Americans are stupid. They're working one or two jobs. They have to raise kids. They're tired. Maybe the only news they watch is a couple minutes of local news at night, or scrolling through their phone. They're not getting the information they're getting from us, Zayna. So the bottom line is, if you are frustrated economically in the deindustrialized Midwest or in other places, it's very easy you got this used car salesman coming in saying, build the wall. They're taking everything. They're taking your jobs. They're threatening your wives. They're rapists. They're drug lords.
They're eating the dogs and cats. Who says that? My God.
And by the way, I just want to point out, and I'm going to brag for a minute, Zayna, and I hope you agree. You think you would see those nice black women on CNN, see those types of people, and hear their stories, hear about gentrification, hear that real talk on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News? You think they're going to be quoted in the New York Times? That's why Status Coup exists. That's why we need your support. That trip that we took, we did 3 states in 10 days. John and I drove over 600 miles there and back. We did Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Frankly, and I will brag, we covered more things on that one trip than most corporate media outlets cover in a year.
Yeah, you did.
We covered poisoned communities, poisoned water. We covered gentrification, economic terrorism. We covered corporate welfare. We covered so many things. I mean, just look at the last couple of weeks and videos we did. And it's expensive.
And sentiment, actually hearing, even though it's anecdotal, it is helpful to hear from the people on the ground of what they are directly experiencing. And that's something that the Democratic Party doesn't do. And like you said, that's certainly something mainstream media doesn't do. They're not out there talking to people.
Status Coup is all the market research either political party needs. Just watch our interviews over the last 6 years. And yes, talking to a few people is anecdotal. I would say we've interviewed enough people that we have a bit of data here on what's going on, both on the left and the right. People are fed up with essentially a new Gilded Age and the economic Hunger Games. And you know what? A lot of them got hoodwinked by Donald Trump, but a lot of them, at its simplest, they're not electing who they want to get a beer with or who they want to who they want their children to learn from. They're electing from who do they think will be better for their pocketbooks and to make life a little easier. And the problem is it's very easy for a fake populist to come in and con people that he's going to be that person if the opposite party, the Democrats, have repeatedly promised you things, but always found rationalizations and twisted themselves into pretzels for why they couldn't do it. That's it. I think we'd be talking about a President Harris if Biden would have passed the $15 minimum wage or extended the child tax credit. I think it still would have been close, but that would have been something bold they could have run on. And they could have ran on doing more. So
it looks like there was a suppression of turnout too, and that's going to be something interesting to track as we go, to see how many people just stayed home.
Well, we know a small amount. We know a small amount. I already told you, among age 18 to 29, which, by the way, the kids are what saved Democrats in the midterms. Age 18 to 29 came out in huge numbers in the midterms after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Age 18 to 29 dropped by 3% this election. That might not sound like a lot. Well, if Trump is winning these Midwest states by 1.2, age 18 to 20 coming out, and with that has dropped for Biden's performance among that group. So age 18 to 29, that I don't know if that would have made the difference in her winning, but when you add that in, Latinos, when you add that in, Dearborn, you have a picture that's coming together here of why she lost. And yeah, I don't blame the 3% drop, meaning the 3% of young people that stayed home, because
or the 4 million that voted third party. It's not their fault.
Or the 100 million that didn't vote.
Yeah.
I am tired of claiming the politician not votes. And this votes that it would have made a difference.
For some reason.
You're not hearing me?
You're cutting out and going fuzzy. I think it's starting to settle now. Maybe it was internet interference or something.
Maybe it was election interference. I don't know. But
they're like, he's saying the truth.
Now, Zayna, if you will allow me, I have more Morning Joe clips for you. Can you handle it?
Fun. Mm-hmm.
Colin.
Thank you so much for doing this to me. I'm so glad I came on.
Colin, let's rev up this sucker. I need more Morning Joe.
90% of people in rural America? Do we want to be a party that gives up on a lot of people out in the suburbs? They've got to make some tough decisions.
Yeah, it turned out based on the result last night that saying Donald Trump is bad, which I think we agree he is in many ways, is not a winning campaign message in America. In fact, Donald Trump grew his margins in 90% of the counties where he ran last night, grew his margins in 90% of the counties, and made it really close in some blue states like Illinois and in New Jersey.
You think? Do you think just running on Orange Man bad was a bad strategy? Who would have known?
But you know
what's out there call that? Guys listening, chat, did you guys know this?
You know what's rich about that? And this goes to the last clip. Am I still lagging?
No, you're good now.
Okay. They said it like Barnacle said it, like, the Democratic Party has a blind spot when it comes to the strong economy versus the lived economy. So does the media. They're the ones putting out the propaganda that we have a strong economy. We don't. When they say it turns out running a campaign, Donald Trump is bad. That's the campaign MSNBC has been running for the last 8 years. That's all they talk about. They don't cover that the Democrats are corrupt.
Yeah.
They don't cover that the Democrats have broken promise after promise. They don't cover that Biden unilaterally surrendered on a $15 minimum wage when he didn't have to. They don't cover that Biden abandoned a public option right away when he got elected. They don't cover that Biden ran on ending drilling on public lands and doubled it. I mean, I could go down the list of things that Biden said he was going to do and didn't.
Or that he did, and it actually expanded Trump's policies from arresting. And we covered this deeply when I was still with you guys. We were covering this, and Tina was on the ground, and John Farina went to some of the protests, and we covered it's now like Chuck Modi did great coverage of this too. It's like 78 people have now been arrested at Stop Cop City protest because people were saying they're going to arrest people at protest. I'm like, dude. Biden expanded the definition of what it meant to be a domestic terrorist to include anti-government sentiment and criticism of authority. Like, isn't that kind of the point of redressing grievances? Is that you have grievances against the authority of the government in certain functions? And they arrested we covered it deeply. I know I helped do the research on this, and it was, some of these charges were bunk. You did a great job. Tina did a great job. We highlighted this at Status Coup, and some of those people are still incarcerated for this.
We were also, by the way, the only independent outlet on the ground at Cop City. Right. We were the only independent outlet on the ground. Chuck Modi was too, on the ground.
That's it.
On the ground. We were there twice. Cost a lot of money. And I don't want to say I told you so, but I'll say I told you so. Zayna, I don't know if you remember, but when all that was going on, I said, hey, don't be surprised if Trump wins Georgia and voter turnout among Democrats drops in the Atlanta area, which is why Biden.
People were shocked by Atlanta. I was like, I'm not.
Biden won Georgia largely because more black people and the Atlanta suburbs, more black people came out in Atlanta and the Atlanta suburbs. Well, looking at the numbers now, it seems like the numbers were down among folks in Atlanta. I don't know. I kind of think the Democratic Party creating a $100 million militarized police compound in the forest, shooting an unarmed protester dead, Tortuguita, arresting dozens of peaceful protesters and charging them with domestic terrorism, and the elected Democratic senators, John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, saying nothing about it, going along with it. Biden's DOJ going along with it. Probably had something to do with that.
Yeah, that's a form of that. People ask me about the term quote unquote fascism, the F word, and I consider, and I'm doing a piece on this, but I did a thread on this. I'm kind of breaking it down a couple days ago, but in some ways, we're always talking about accelerationism. I've said over the last 30 years, a Dem POTUS has been accelerationist in a number of ways. We've got Obama, when he passed the ACA, that was an effort to privatize, and you've covered this, I've covered this, to privatize our healthcare system. At the time that he did this, we had clinics across the country where you could take your kids in and get their teeth cleaned. You could take them in and have a tooth pulled. You could get their glasses. You could have cancer screenings. If you had a broken bone, you could sometimes go into the clinic and get that fixed. The clinics provided an insane amount of healthcare completely subsidized. We had 2,500 clinics closed down across the country and 1,600 rural hospitals. And many of those hospitals provided almost fully subsidized care. So I wouldn't say we had Medicare for all or anything close to that, but we had a system that was still helping people more than the ACA did. That's not covered, but the ACA actually gutted our healthcare system and then put it in the hands of private insurance company because it was a project 2008. Yes, Heritage Foundation is at a project every year. It was Project 2008 Heritage Foundation plan to privatize our, at the time, public healthcare system that we had. And they succeeded. And it's gutted it. And people are sick and don't have resources because of that. It didn't provide 30 million more people with insurance. Yeah, more people had insurance, but people had less access to actual healthcare, real healthcare, gone. You could go to these clinics and have full pediatric care. Gone, gutted. Our health departments were gutted. And so that's just one example. I can give another 150 from where tuition-free college, we've essentially had that before 1998. State and I mean, not for private institutions, but state college and community colleges were subsidized at 85%, meaning you only had to pay 15% of your tuition. That's how you hear older generations go, I went to college and I could pay for it as for a summer job. Yes, of course you could, because your college was subsidized at 85%. The government paid 85% of your bill. Now they only subsidize 11%. I have listed so many of these Heritage Foundation plans that were passed by Clinton, Obama, and then now, yes, Biden. Of course, Bush did some of it too, but the number that gets done is far higher with the Democratic POTUS because this goes back to what set me off on this tangent in the first place. There's no coverage when a Dem is in office. These liberals like Morning Joe, CNN do not cover their neoliberal policies. They don't cover the neoliberal legislation. Instead, they sugarcoat it. They tell us the economy is great. They lie to us. And of course, we're not going to get this from Republicans either, from like Fox News, because they're like, oh, they're communist. When the reality is that these presidents are passing neocon policies.
Did you see last night, if you missed it, that it's a long story, but we bounced around in Philly to 3 different locations because originally, I thought there would be a standoff in downtown Philly between MAGA people and Harris people, but they had moved the ballot processing and the ballot counting outside of Philly. They moved it to northern Philly, a half hour away, because in 2020 there were bomb threats to the Philly Convention Center, and somebody drove up from Virginia with an army chest of guns to shoot up the convention center. So they moved it. So there was really no one for me to interview in downtown Philly. Long story short, we ended up at a brewery that was having a watch party. I wasn't aware that it was like a hardcore Kamala pom-pom crowd. Whatever. I mean, it is what it is. That's the only place I could go to, talk to people. I tried to be respectful. I wasn't like pushing back hard on these people because it's like election night. I don't need to get into a hardcore debate. But one guy, oh my God, this fucking drunk snowflake, Zeynab. I just asked him tepidly, basically citing those women in Detroit. I said, do you have any concerns about the Democratic Party? Because I've gone around the country recently to the 3 swing states, and a lot of Democrats are telling me they're fed up with the Democratic Party. He went fucking nuts on me. He stopped the interview. He said, you're a fucking asshole. You're not going to get me to say anything negative about the Democratic Party in Philadelphia. And then he went around and tried to talk to the manager. Then he tried to go around and tried to, tattle to the manager and get me kicked out. And then the head of the party came up to me and said, we're getting
the manager is the most liberal thing in the world.
And then the guy who was hosting the party came up to me and said, there's a lot of people complaining about what you're doing here. I mean, a lot of people, meaning that one drunk guy over there that was triggered by me daring to ask him a quasi hard question on the Anyway, long story short, I want to read a comment from one Bernard Sanders, if you'll allow me, because Bernie Sanders has come out with his statement after hanging around with his pal Joe for the last 4 years. Bernie Sanders is out with his statement, and it's a barn burner. His reaction to the election: it should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party, which has abandoned working class people, would find that the working class has abandoned them. First, it was the white working class, and now it is Latinos and black workers as well. While the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change. And they're right. Today, while the very rich are doing phenomenally well, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and we have more income and wealth inequality than ever before. Unbelievably, real inflation accounted for weekly wages for the average American worker are actually lower now than they were 50 years ago. Today, despite an explosion in technology and worker productivity, many young people have a worse standard of living than their parents. And many of them worry that artificial intelligence and robotics will make a bad situation even worse. Today, despite spending far more per capita than other countries, we remain the only wealthy nation not to guarantee health care to all as a human right, and we pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. We alone among major countries cannot even guarantee paid family and medical leave. Today, despite strong opposition from a majority of Americans, we continue to spend billions funding the extremist Netanyahu government's all-out war against the Palestinian people, which has led to the horrific humanitarian disaster of mass malnutrition and the starvation of thousands of children. Come on, Bernie, use the G word. It's genocide. Will the big money interests and well-paid consultants who control the Democratic Party learn any real lessons from this disastrous campaign? Will they understand the pain and political alienation that tens of millions of Americans are experiencing? Do they have any idea as to how we could take on the increasingly powerful oligarchy, which has so much economic and political power? Probably not. In the coming weeks and months, those of us concerned about grassroots democracy and economic justice need to have some very serious political discussions. The floor is yours.
Well, I think he said it all, except for you're right. I didn't like his language on the genocide in Gaza, mass atrocities and war crimes. More explains what's going on there that we are funding with our tax dollars. But the rest of it, yeah, I just kind of wish Bernie would have said this before he endorsed Kamala instead of gaslighting us that she was going to be an amazing choice, because gaslighting people isn't going to work. He should have held them accountable. So he should maybe take some of his own advice next time. But he is right at the end of it. I think when he talks about lessons probably won't be learned, but they should be for this party. I'm not a Democrat, I'm independent, but for this party to survive, they're going to have to make major shifts, because I see a decline partially because of their own choosing by not running people anywhere, abandoning the 50-state strategy, they have done this to themselves to a certain extent, but also if they continue on those 3 points you and I were both making earlier of running off vibes, orange man bad, always looking for someone who's more fascistic to prop up so that they don't have to do anything and they can make just excuses the whole time and run on fear, they're going to have to start running on something tangible other than fear of the other guy. And they're going to have to make real legislative changes, or I think the party's in the crapper, to be honest with you.
I'd like to, for one moment, bring in the great editor and producer of Status Coup, Mr. Colin Tooley, because we've been yapping our mouths. So much. I'd like to know what Colin thinks. Have Zayna or I missed any points, Colin, on the disastrous second defeat to the Orange Man? And why is your camera off again? Are you naked again?
I can turn it on here. Give me just half a sec to boot it up. But I try to think of anything you guys have missed, but I think that
and by the way, congratulations on getting a third term of Senator Ted Cruz in Texas.
Yeah, well, I am excited to not have to look at those Colin Allred ads every 20 seconds when I'm watching Netflix or what have you. But it was very funny because it's Colin Allred essentially. This might be a side tangent, but basically ran the campaign and tried to act like he was the next Beto O'Rourke, but without doing, to Beto's credit, without doing any of the groundwork Beto did. He just figured, hey, if I spend a lot of money, I might have a chance against Cruz, and then just once again lost by 10 points or whatever it was. But it's a very what swing states actually, do we know what swing states Kamala won that
none
Trump didn't win? None.
Trump won all the swing states, all 7 of them.
Yeah.
To be fair, it's an undemocratic system. We shouldn't have an electoral college. And when it's all said and done, I think the numbers will get narrower, and I think she probably will lose some of the swing states by about a point, maybe a little more than a point. So it is, like, on paper a landslide, but within the swing states she lost, she only lost several of them by about a point. I think if we had a progressive candidate, your dogs and cats agree. I think if we had a progressive candidate, you could, if you're only losing by a point, that easily could have went the other way if you had somebody running with a half coherent message.
Well, that's what I've actually been talking to, like, my friends and stuff about. At some point, this feels intentional. Like, they chose Kamala and she chose not to be anything other than just this vague whatever and be pro-genocide and everything. At some point, it felt like they intentionally wanted to lose, which obviously they get way more funding. They'll most likely win the next like set of Senate races and stuff like that, or House races, whatever it might be, and they'll get lots of funding from that. So at some point, I think that this has to be intentional, but it's really something I said last night was to my wife and friend was, I can't wait for 4 years just for the Democrats to have not learned anything, run another Hillary Clinton campaign, and say that election is now for sure the most important. Now that Donald Trump can't run it again, I can't wait to find out who the new. No, this you don't understand. Trump was bad, but this guy's worse. And then in 10 years, they're going to be like, well, Trump wasn't that bad. Let's have him on MSNBC as a paid guest now. And this is going to keep going until something outside of the two-party system or the political system entirely, as Jordan talks about with the general strike, or something outside pressure changes. We'll just keep doing this until it's just pure fascist and there's no elections anymore, so it doesn't matter.
Well, thanks for the pick-me-up. I appreciate it.
I think that was a really, really solid analysis, Colin.
Yes.
I mean, that's how I feel, and he's right. I mean, I reported on this a couple weeks ago. I was talking about how there, when it comes to, and I was talking about this last night, when it comes to genocide not being a red line, for instance, that's a horrific precedent to set. And the thing is that the Democratic Party moves more and more and more toward fascism, because they are fascist already, but they embed themselves more in it, and they're able to get more done as long as there's someone that is bad enough that they are challenging. It gives them cover. It's a warm blanket for them to get under and not have to do anything, and then just tout out every 4 years or during midterms, hey, this person is so evil. This person is so evil. As long as there is someone more evil, there's a greater evil, then you have people arguing, 250,000 people are going to be slaughtered in Gaza as opposed to 300,000 people. And that's an insane place that they have us as a society. And I do think that this election was a little bit of a referendum on that. But I think that there were a lot of liberals making that argument. It was extremely disturbing to me. And I think Colin kind of captured that. And then how after a while, Trump will be normalized. His rhetoric will be normalized.
Yeah. Colin, let's play the remaining morning Joe clips we have, just so I could have some
wait,
fun.
Can I add one other thing?
Yeah.
Just as an example, do you remember when George W. Bush was so cute because he couldn't figure how to put on the raincoat? You remember? He can't figure out his poncho. What a cutie pie. Or Dick Cheney being normalized right now. What are you
talking about? You don't remember the Today Show doing a, excuse my friend's, blowjob to George W. Bush because he's a wonderful painter?
Yes, I remember that, unfortunately.
Oh, God. Next time, if Dick makes it, they're going to parade around the country with Dick Cheney. Ugh, it's disgusting. All right. One more morning Joe clip.
He played to fear and anger, and that prevailed. I once heard John Meacham say that George Wallace's 19% in 1968 has now become the majority in this country. And, on a very personal level, I'm trying to figure out the words of encouragement that I give to my daughter this morning, who just 24 hours ago allowed herself to believe that a woman of color could be elected president. I don't know quite what to tell her. And the story of this election is what Julian was talking about earlier. We've come to believe over generations that different demographic groups vote as a block because for so often, for so long, the black vote in this country voted in a block, 90% for Democrats, from Johnson all the way to Obama. And that's just not true anymore. As different demographic groups become further integrated into our society, they start caring about all the issues everybody else does, whether it's the economy, whether it's crime, whether it's border security. And political scientists will study this for years and years. I'm fascinated with the fact that in this city, Trump did better in every single borough. He went from 16% in the Bronx in 2020 to 27% in the Bronx in 2024. How did that happen?
Seems it seems these folks are learning valuable lessons about 10 to 15 years after everybody else learned them.
A little too late. They're so out of touch that they're like, what just happened? Like this shook their foundations. You know, their house of cards came falling down. And I think it's so interesting that they said Trump ran on fear and anger. He did. There's some accuracy to that. But he also gave people hope in a weird way. And I'm not defending the guy. I can't stand the orange man. Don't get me wrong. But I'm just talking about people's viewpoint. He ran on some policies. He ran on, you know, making things better. When honestly, the Harris campaign, even though they try to run on joy and vibes, they didn't give us any substance to that. They didn't give us any hope, really. It was just, they ran on fear of orange man bad. They ran on, you know, this will be the end to our democracy, even though they didn't even have a primary for the candidate that they're running, and they're kicking like third parties off the ballot, and they're doing all this shady stuff. They're running on saving our democracy. And I think it just didn't work. You know, Morning Joe is one of the shows that ran most on that, you know, a lot of their rhetoric centered around saving democracy, how Project 2025 was the greatest threat in American history. You can only repeat that so much when people can't even when they can't pay their bills and they can't put food on the table and they're getting poisoned by their water and they can't find jobs. You can only run on that so much, you know, orange man bad. And that's really, yeah, they ran on fear too. Both campaigns ran on fear.
What's incredible to me is, and you know, I respect that guy. I mean, I think his concern about what he was going to tell his daughter is sincere. I'm not bashing that, but how did you not realize that minorities they don't vote, they're not a monolith, and they don't necessarily vote on the core issues you think they vote on? When Donald Trump won in 2016 after launching his campaign calling immigrants rapists, drug lords, and murderers, how did you not get that that's not the top concern for all Latino voters? How did you not get that this isn't the top concern when Donald Trump, you know, literally is calling for qualified immunity for all police, and he did better in 2020 among black men. Not amazing, but he went up among black voters. I think he went from 2016 to 2020 up 4% among black voters.
There's something that's known among the black community that's discussed often, that I have heard from organizers, and that is that he did release a lot of people on the list that had been held. I forget the name of the organization that he worked with, but it's the organization that follows, especially.
It was the First Step Act, yeah.
Yes, exactly, the First Step Act. And so there's that made an impact on the community because they're like, well, this guy talks about all this stuff, but he's actually releasing people who were wrongly charged from prison. And then we literally watched as someone who was wrongly charged in the state of Michigan be killed days before the election. You know, and I think that did have an impact. I think that those kinds of things, it's different for every person what has an impact, because we're not a monolith, but that's one of the factors that had an impact.
Yeah.
That I've heard from community members, that I've heard from organizers.
I'd like to shift the convo before I have to go help with my nearly 2-year-old daughter, who's turning 2 soon.
Oh, terrible twos.
She's already reached the terrible twos.
This is a fun stage, though. It's an adventure every day.
Yeah. She says, "Dada, hold, Dada, hold," and then I pick her up because she's saying hold, and as soon as I pick her up, out. She can't make up her mind. Anyway, so I want to shift it to, and this is a broad question, but where does the left go now? And I'm not just saying the left. I mean, where does the working class go now? Because I personally do not think we in the left can afford another resistance 2.0. To be clear, I'm not saying that we should not fight aggressively, peacefully I'm not saying we should not fight what's to come with Trump. And I think it is going to be worse this time with Trump, because he's not going to have even the few guardrails and stop signs he had in his first administration. It's been reported that he did have some sane people around him that stopped him from bombing Mexico and bombing Iran and killing American citizens and killing immigrants. So I'm not saying that we as the left and the working class should not protest Trump, should not try to stop these things. However, a huge problem under Trump was it all became about Trump. It was Trump 24/7, and all the protests and all the activism was all focused on Trump. And when that happens, you don't continue growing your movement for universal health care, college, free college, saving the planet. I don't know about you, Zayna. It's like 70 degrees in November where I live right now on the East Coast.
Same here. Yeah.
Yeah. This is not normal. On Halloween, it was pretty hot. The climate is on fire. We don't have time just to focus on Trump. I say the same things for the media. I expect the corporate media to go back to 24/7 Trump. It was great for their ratings. It was great for their profit, and they'll do that. I hope the independent media doesn't follow. They probably will too for clicks. We're not going to, and it would be much more profitable if we did. It would be much more profitable if we just did Trump 24/7. Of course, we're going to cover Trump. He's going to be the president, but we're not going to forget Flint, East Palestine, and all the other stories we cover that you depend on us for. But with all of said, where does the left go? Because I don't really think. I understand the concept, Jordan. If the house is on fire, you got to put out the fire before you can focus on other things. But the house has already been on fire before Trump.
Yeah.
So where do you think we need to go?
Well, one thing for sure, going back to what you said about the marches and stuff like that, the March for Our Lives ended up being co-opted by the Democratic Party and ended up being a listserv, basically. People signing up, and then those signatures, those lists got sold back to the Democratic Party. Same with the Women's March, same with the Sunrise Movement. And then consulting firms get wealthy, nothing happens. We don't see any movement from marches. And I'm not saying not to march, not to protest. We should. It helps get the word out there. But there has to be other organizing. Some of the things that you cover so much are union organizing. But we also have to think beyond unions, because unions is a small bucket, like starting unions. Yes, we got to combat right to work laws. We need to look at ballot measures in the states where you can do ballot measures, and then in other states where you can't do ballot measures. People need, if one electoral solution would be for people to run in these seats that are uncontested. There's a huge opportunity there. The Dems aren't running in these places. Run people, run independent. Don't run with a party. You get easier ballot access in a lot of these places. Running independent, people need to run, retake these state houses. Get 20, 30 seats in a state house, retake it, and then you can do local state legislation. That also will help unions form and will help workers. But look for building co-ops. Look for other ways that we can come together as communities, community gardens. I know that sounds silly, but something as simple as a community garden can help your community. I think those are the ways. I think we're just going to have to come together as working people. And one of the things that the United States does really good is we adopted a very Western world view of everyone isolated in their little homes, apart from each other, in your own lives, being their own little section. We need to find other ways to be collective. And I think in part of that is co-ops. Go to your city council meetings, start, raising hell when it comes to that kind of stuff electorally. That can make a difference. Your city council seat makes a huge difference. So one of the things is shifting the focus from it being federal and, POTUS to what the hell is happening in your own state, in your own backyard. And then also worker movements, whether it's union worker movements or other ways where we think outside of the box. If you are somewhere the company's not large enough to form a union, what can you do? Those are the only things that I can see. And I think that we're going to need people like Status Coup, working and reporting on things like you guys do report on, so people know what's happening locally. And and I think that there needs to be a drive toward building journalism, to actual, real journalism. I miss it.
I'm just going to be honest. I'm just going to be honest to the 600 or so people currently watching. If we don't grow financially, meaning if more people do not sign up for $5 to $10 a month, we're probably going to have to scale things back. I'm just being honest. I mean, Zaina, you worked with me for a while. I don't say this. I don't say this for pity, because I have it a lot better than most. I've kind of reached my breaking point. I cannot work 6 to 7 days a week forever. I've been working for 6 years, basically around the clock. I don't just do live streams. I am on the phone all day long, text calls with activists and sources around America. I have activists and sources calling me in the morning, at night, on weekends, on holidays. I love you all. I'm not knocking you. I understand why you contact me, because we are one of the only outlets. But I need money to hire another reporter. I need money to hire a producer. God, I need money for an assistant. I'm not trying to sound like bougie. I need an assistant. Do you know how many meetings recently I've missed because I just forgot about them? I forgot I had a book interview, which was pretty bad, because I'm juggling.
There's nothing wrong with needing to hire people as an independent institution. There's nothing wrong with needing to pay people and needing help. And this.
Yeah, but the problem is,
to grow, you need help.
If you don't take corporate money, which we don't, proudly so, and most wealthy people don't want to invest in real, living, breathing, on-the-ground journalism. And if they want to invest, it's with strings attached, which I talked about on my live stream earlier. I don't know if you know this, Zaina. A couple of years ago, I had a big ass offer of $500,000 from somebody attached to the Democratic Party to invest in Status Coup.
Yeah, you told me about that.
I'm not gonna lie, I thought about it. I would have probably been able to hire 6, 7 people with that for at least a year or so. And I think we would have. I think we would have grown significantly. But this person, I ain't going to name names, but this person would not sign in the contract. We have complete editorial control. He told me we would, but he would not sign it in contract. And I thought about it, and I just said, you know what? The way we are doing it is the incredibly difficult way. It's taking years off my life because I'm working around the clock. It's hurting my marriage, frankly, because I'm working around the clock, and my wife gets pissed because when we're supposed to be spending time together, I'm on my phone texting with activists and sources, or we're out walking our kid and I'm picking up the phone to an activist. But it's the harder way, but it's the righteous way to do it. And I knew if I would have taken the money, this thing would have got watered down, or I'd have to be dealing with a rich fuck trying to water it down. So I didn't take the money. Some days I not regret it, but it's like, God damn it, I need that money. And you know what? There are other outlets, not naming names, the Young Turks, that did take that money. And a lot more, by the way, than 500 million, 20 million. A lot more than 500,000, 20 million. And, think whatever you want about what they've become. But the point is, there's only so much one person. I am the only person here on the reporting side. Tina helps out freelance, but to get an experienced reporter that could do a good job, I got to pay someone like $60,000, $70,000 a year. I'm not going to pay someone $20,000 a year to get a full-time producer to help us take our long form content and cut it down to short form, and get it around. You got to pay someone 60, 50, 60. So the point is,
I was wanting to help with that, and I did cut some and stuff for you. You remember that we were going to turn it into like now this, but that's a lot. It was a lot of work. And then you were also, at the time, I was helping Jordan book, and I was talking to sources, and I got to see behind the scenes. The work that Jordan does, Colin does. There's a lot.
Poor Colin's doing the job of normally 4 people would be doing.
He is. That's accurate. That's accurate. And I felt the weight just from, you guys were great to me. I'm not saying you were bad to me, but I felt what you got. I was like, you all are really pulling it out. And especially everything is simple, from having to go and book. You got to map the trip, You got to get the sources outlined to go and do these road trips. Then you have to book your hotels, and you don't want to get anywhere too expensive. You want to have a budget. So all of these things are cascading, and that's a lot of there's a lot more pieces to doing on the ground journalism.
If a reporter, air quotes, from CNN goes on the ground, they're going on the ground with a producer.
Yeah.
They're going on the ground with multiple camera people, not just one. Oftentimes, they're going on the ground with security, but they're going on the phone with a crew. They have a producer that scouts their trip before they go. They have a producer that finds the guests and books things. They have a producer that scouts.
Assistants that get things ready for them when they're on the ground.
Right. They have a producer that scouts, like, perfect example last night. And it's on me. What's 100% on me, but I'm juggling 20 things, so I fucked up. I said, let's go to Philadelphia, because when we were there in 2020, I don't know if you remember the standoff outside the Philadelphia Convention Center. You had MAGA people in one corner. You had Biden people in another. And it was the perfect spot for me to be, because I was in the middle of all of it. And I could just interview MAGA people and interview Biden people. I just assumed, and somebody wrongly told me, that's where it's going to be again. Well, I get there, and there's no one fucking out in Philadelphia, and I'm going live from a street corner. So I said, where is everyone? This is election day. I looked it up. If I had more time, I would have looked it up earlier. Or if I had a producer, they could have looked it up. Well, because of all the insanity in 2020, they moved the location away from the Philadelphia Convention Center. So they weren't counting the ballots there anymore. They moved it a half hour north. And then it took me 20 minutes to figure out where the fuck is the location that they moved it to. So then John and I last night, an hour and a half before we're supposed to go live, we're driving a half hour outside of Philadelphia to find this fortress that they have the ballot processing, hoping there's going to be people to interview. We show up. It's Fortress America, Zayna. You cannot get in there. There is police 2 blocks. So we're not going to stay here because there's no one to interview. There's all there is press. So then I said, all right, let's just call some bars. So I called a few bars, and I found one.
That's not a bad idea, though.
I found one bar that said, yeah, we're having a watch party. I don't know if it's going to be a good watch party. I don't know if there's going to be 5 people or 500. I don't know if it's going to be people I'd want to interview or just Kamala stands. But I said, fuck it. We got to go live and do something. So we went live, and it happened to be a Kamala stand bar. But I tell you all this because normally you would have a producer that does all this beforehand. I don't. Do you know how hard it is, Zayna? And you saw a little bit of this when you were with us. Normally, if you're on the road for 7 to 10 days, when you get home, you get to take a day or 2 off, right?
Yeah.
When I get home, that's actually when more of the work starts, because we have all these interviews we just did. A lot of them we haven't put out, and I have to then go through them, and because I don't have a producer, I have to then basically go through it and storyboard the whole thing and send Colin the notes how to make. It's not because Colin is bad and Colin couldn't do that, but Colin doesn't have enough time.
Doing a million other things.
Yeah, Colin doesn't have the time to do that. So I'm basically having to go through an hour interview and find time codes and send Colin, hey, start with this time code, then drop in this image, then drop in this image. And then 2 hours later, I'm putting out 25 other fires. So I tell you all this because, as humbly as I could say it, I've been doing the job that normally 6 or 7 people would be doing. So with all due respect to other outlets that are begging you for money, obviously send your money wherever you think it deserves it more. All those other outlets, they're not reinventing the wheel here, folks. They're sitting in a studio bloviating out of their assholes. Some of them, I like what they say, but they don't exactly have the overhead that we do have. Meaning, their costs are fixed, right? They pay rent for their studio, or it's at their house. But maybe they pay rent for their studio, they have a crew, whatever. We are an investigative on-the-ground outlet. Just election day yesterday, and sometimes you win and sometimes you lost. We lost yesterday. Between Tina, her cameraman, John, hotels, travel, it's going to cost me probably $1,500 because we tried to go big and me report in Philly, her report in Vegas. Unfortunately, we had 300 people watching because there was a gazillion bigger channels live at the same time. So we're going to lose money.
Sign up for memberships.
Yes.
Donate if you can. Colin, if you could share the links. Sorry, Colin, I'm asking you. I'm asking you nicely, my friend. If you could share the links where people can donate and go to, if you can, when you're joining and you're chatting, throw in some super chats. That helps too. And any way that you can support, because journalism's kind of dead. We need to support the outlets that are out there. You know, there used to be people that did this kind of thing. There were independent newspapers. There were groups out there that do it. Now Status Coup and a handful of other people across the country do it. It's down to a drop in a bucket. And now if you want to be independent, you have to do it on asking, the folks that follow you and watch your content to give and to donate. It's the only way that you can keep afloat, honestly. And you can't just do it for free because, well, for one thing, I don't know if we really want multimillionaires that can just sit at home or that can travel and do this because they're going to be out of touch. Let's be honest. We need regular working people covering the news, doing the news, reporting the news, and we need to report on what's happening to everyday working people. And we need an agency to be able to do that. Newspapers used to be a wonderful, beautiful source for this. I'm a newspaper journalist. I'm an investigative journalist, but they're gone. Yep. They're gone. So it's very important for us to support groups like Status Coup and to support Status Coup. And he's not kidding. I saw the work that he does firsthand. And I'm not just, this isn't like a infomercial. He really does it. It's really hard. And if you guys can help out, it would mean a lot to us. It's the cost of a coffee a month, not that we can afford Starbucks, but the cost of a coffee per month would help. So if you have that extra, you got that $5, you got $10, you got $20, whatever it is that you can give, it accrues and it makes a difference. If 600 people in the chat all gave $1 today, that would pay half for this trip. If they did it tomorrow, that would have this trip covered. So, help throw a little bit the way.
Total behind the scenes, but we had talked about, I had said, I think you'd be better on air. I'd love to give you a show 5 days a week. I don't have the money to pay you what you should be paid. Yeah. That was our conversation. I wasn't going to insult her and be like, hey, will you do it for like $50 a show? No. So there's real,
I did say I'll do anything I can to help whenever I can help.
Right.
But yeah, Jordan was like, no, if you're going to do work, you need to be paid as an employee. And I appreciate that. Or as, somebody, we need to pay you if you're going to be doing labor. And that says a lot because a lot of people will just gouge you or take advantage. And Jordan wanted to make sure that if my hours were increasing, that I was getting paid. And it was getting to a point where we were trying and the hours were getting heavy. And Jordan was like, I don't feel right. We need to pay you for what it is that you're contributing. And so we need more. Status Coup needs support. And so if you guys can, like I said, 600 people watching, if everybody, and then people are over there on Twitter, if any of you guys are watching over there, $1 from 1,500 people today would cover this last trip on the ground. And, covering protests, the Stop Cop City protest was huge to be able to cover that, for instance. We mentioned that. And that was such an important story that no one was covering.
That's statuscoup.com/donate, by the way, if you're wondering. All right, so I'll stop my pity party. The last thing I wanted to say, because then I got to go to my streaming child.
It's not a pity party. You got to ask, or you're not going to get the help. I mean, it's literally help us keep going. That's not a bad question to ask.
I think most people don't realize, because I don't really get into it that much, but this is kind of Status Coup really is a one of its kind. And what I mean by that, there are not many outlets that do two things at once, which is investigative reporting and daily live streaming. Mm-hmm. Typically, like Abby Martin, I would consider like an investigative person. They don't do daily live streams. I love Abby Martin, but they're not grinding out content every day. So I'm an investigative reporter, which is a full-time job in itself, while trying to churn out daily content. That's really 3 jobs in one. So bottom line, we need help. If you could help us, please do. If you say, Jordan, what's the best way to help you? Become a member. I'd rather you become a member monthly, statuscoup.com/join. The link is in the description of this live stream. If you become a monthly member, which, by the way, you could do for as low as 16 cents a day. 16 cents a day. That's what $5 a month is.
Now
16
you do sound
cents
like
a day.
I'm just kidding. For just 16 cents a day, you can actually get real reporting, but it's true.
I'll do that. I'm gonna do that commercial. I'm gonna do that commercial. Like, all right. The last thing I'll say, I agree with you on focusing on electoral politics, but to me, I'll tell you where I think we need to go. First of all, I don't think it's an either or. I think too often different YouTube channels and different
I agree with that.
have said, you know, fuck electoral politics. We got to only do direct action, or only focus on electoral politics, or fuck it all. Let's only focus on building a third party. I think that is a mistake, to put all your apples in one basket. And thank you. Michael just signed up after my diatribe. So
Thanks,
new Status Coup YouTube member, Michael. And by the way, I should say, as a member, we do monthly member calls. We're going to do our call next week. So that's through Zoom. So you also get perks as a member. Okay. I really think, you know what? The definition of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over again. God bless Black Lives Matter. God bless the Palestinian protesters. God bless the dreamers, the climate protesters, the healthcare protesters. But folks, we've been marching in the same streets for the last decade or two, chanting the same fucking things over and over and over again, marching the same streets over and over and over again. Millions of people just marched after George Floyd was basically lynched on camera. Police got more money. The tactics need to change. I respect activists, and I'm not shitting on your efforts, but they will let you protest. When I say they, I mean the United Corporations of America, the government and the corporations. They'll allow you to protest. And if you get a little too loud, they're going to crack down with their public security force, the police. They'll crack your skulls. They'll attack you. We've seen it. We've shown it. But if all we're doing is protesting with our feet, that might raise awareness, but that's not making them worry. What actually makes, and I'm not talking about the politicians, because I don't actually think it's the politicians we have to move. Believe it or not, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump aren't making the fundamental decisions for the economy. They are making foreign policy decisions, but even that, the true bosses are the donors. We live in a representative oligarchy, not a representative democracy. We live in a representative oligarchy. Don't take it from me. Princeton University, not exactly leftists, they did a study in 2014 that found the United States is an oligarchy, not a democracy. Okay? In France, if you try and raise the retirement age by 2 years, they storm the fucking gates. Shit is lit on fire. They don't fuck around in France. And you know what? They have gotten concessions, and they have gotten their government to back down. Now, we have challenges that France doesn't have, because the French are able to protest a lot easier because they have some security as citizens. They have universal health care. They have stronger labor unions. You can't get fired if you protest. But if you lose your job, at least you have health care in France. We don't have those things. I get it. With that said, imagine, and I'm sorry to be a broken record because I've said this over a lot, Zayna. Imagine if the millions of people that protested for George Floyd, imagine if even 10 to 15% of them took economic action with their boots on the ground. Imagine if, pick a couple, protests of Amazon, protests of corporate banking. Thousands of people said, we're not paying the rent. Jail us all. The rent is not proportional to wages and productivity. Imagine if people came together economically protesting. I don't believe yet that the police could come to your home, put their knee in your neck, take your credit card, and force you to purchase something from Amazon. I don't think they've quite come up with that yet. They could attack you when you're protesting with your foot on the ground. They cannot force you to spend money at certain places. I truly believe. I mean, look at what happened in Canada with the trucker protest. Forget what they were protesting about, because I think I know a lot of people differ. They shut down a major bridge between the United States and Canada, which is a major harm for commerce. Oh, Canada went fucking buck wild. They ended that protest right away. Well, could they do that in America? We're much bigger than Canada. We have a lot more citizens than Canada. They can't do that to us.
The dock workers, union was a massive threat, because that would completely freeze up commerce and logistics. Logistically speaking, if you can throw a wrench in logistics for goods, you have to measure the harm it does to people, but that can be an incredibly impactful way to protest.
Which brings me to my second point, because I said this earlier on my live stream when I was driving. With these economic boycotts, and we're going to have to talk about this more, but there's two actions you have to do. One is withhold your money. The other is put money into a mutual aid pot. We do not want to hurt the Amazon workers. We do not want to we don't want to hurt the worker bees. I don't give a shit about the white collar workers, frankly. I'm talking about the blue collar workers. We don't want to hurt the people doing the labor. So we need, for all the money you've given to candidates, redistribute that money to a mutual aid pot if there are targeted economic boycotts. But let me tell you something. Right now, there's been like protest Amazon first day of the month. That does nothing. Protest Amazon for a month. Get tens of thousands of people to take their money out of corporate banks into credit unions.
We had an impactful one during Trump's administration that helped us with oil prices. There was a global, but it was global. It was a global, don't buy your oil today, or don't buy gas. And there were millions of Americans that participated in that. They didn't buy gas that day. Some filled up the day before, whatever. But having that impact of not buying gas for one day, they brought the prices down. Because they set the prices. The oil moguls set the prices. They brought our prices down, and they have not gotten quite as high as they were at that point since. But there was I'm not saying it's not expensive now, but it's not gotten high. I mean, at that point, I think in some places in California, it was like $8 a pump. People, may have a short memory of this because this was during COVID, but we did the protest one day. Nobody buys gas, and hundreds of millions across the globe participated, and it basically shut down the stock market for a day when it came to oil and gas prospects, and they changed. Immediately went down the next day. That was effective.
And to be clear, because I want to read this comment, this is a good point. I'm not saying this is easy. This is not easy. There are obstacles to doing this. Somebody needs to get to work. You're scared to not pay your rent because you have kids and you don't want to get thrown out of your apartment. I'm not saying do this on an island by yourself, but at the end of the day, this country, there's always been corruption in America since its founding, because that's just human nature. People are corrupt and politicians are corrupt. The corruption got a lot worse the last 40 years, specifically starting in the 1970s and 50 years, and skyrocketing under Reagan and all of it, loosening the regulations and laws on money and politics. Reagan comes in, the union busting, the deregulation, and then Bill Clinton comes on and does that on steroids. But so we're not going. I'm sorry to tell you, we're not going to have a general strike tomorrow. You need a build up to that. I'm not going to lie to you and say we could have a general strike tomorrow. But if we start having an economically organizing too many activist groups, and I get all of my reporting generally through community members and activist groups, they're just doing the same protests over and over without any economic organizing. That's what's missing. I'm not saying it will completely erase and reverse this cesspool corrupt system we have, but you got a lot better chance of real structural policy change. If President Trump or President Harris, or name your fucking puppet, gets an angry call from Jeff Bezos, hey, these protesters are really hurting our quarterly profits, you have to do something. That's how it works. With that, Zaina, I would love to have you on more. I got to go take over for my wife. Tell the masses where they can find your great work.
You can follow me at Zeynab Day on Twitter. And as I had mentioned on my last show, I lost a family member, and I was going to do a huge launch, but she has been sick on and off. Other things have been going on, and so because of that, it was delayed. Needed some time, but I will be launching soon, and I have some awesome interviews. I did one with Chuck Modi, so I'm really excited. So you can find me at Bullhorn Bulletin, BullhornBulletin on Substack. You can find me at Zeynab Day on YouTube, Zeynab Day on Twitter. And there's sometimes I'll release little snippets of news and stuff like that on Twitter, or little bits of investigation that I've done. So if you guys want to follow me there, it's not always a big, huge piece. It'll just be, sometimes I'll stumble on something and I'm like, hey, and I'll report on it. So yeah, just give me a follow and check it out. And
Colin, if we could put her Twitter or X name, whatever the fuck they're calling it these days, and we haven't even gotten into. What's that?
I said they're in the description below for anyone. Yeah.
Thanks, Colin.
We haven't even gotten into the fact that Elon Musk, God knows what department he's going to run in this Trump administration. And by the way, to the person who said, well, the silver lining is RFK is going to save United States health, go get your fucking head examined. RFK Jr. should be nowhere near anything having to do with health. But that's another discussion.
Autistic, so the thought of him being there's some good and some. I said that just real quick. I said that RFK being in that position is like playing Russian roulette, because sometimes he hits the nail on the head, and then other times he's so off that it's dangerous. Yeah. So,
Colin, could you do me a super chat with Zaina if she could hang around? Because my wife is telling me my kid is having a temper tantrum. Could you read the super chat? Okay, yeah. If you guys could read the super chats, because I got to go. I'll be back tomorrow. Take it away, folks. Thank you so much.
Here, I'll pull them up on screen for you.
Sure.
If you
Thank you. C-Dub became a member. That's awesome. Let's see. Jeremy, super chat. Not that I'm a Kamala fan between the two. I had hope when I went to the polls yesterday. Never been in a line at a poll. Oh, that's interesting. It was a line all day yesterday. So the turnout looked like, at least in your area, was pretty busy yesterday. Denise, thank you so much. The duopoly is not about RVL. It's about keeping the poor from understanding that this is oligarchy. It's the illusion of choice to keep us focused on the shell game. It's true. This is rich versus everyone else. That's right. Usually at the end of the day, where the loyalties always fall are on class lines. And you are correct. It is a duopoly and an oligarchy. Great times. Fly, Champa, fly. Hey, buddy. How's it going? Look what the Dems did to Marianne Williamson and Dean. And Dean Phillips. That is so true. They sabotaged their primaries. And then I thought it was so interesting because we did have a primary. People ran in it. But instead of choosing whoever it was that had the highest percentage of votes in the primary, they just seated Kamala Harris. Even though a primary did take place, people ran in that primary. Anyway, thank you so much, Fly. Raul Morales, thank you for your super chat. Thank you so much. Guy from Kings Highway, super chat. The price of coffee. Thank you. Live the dream. Coming soon. And thank you so much. Coming soon, surrounded by yellow stars. The Let's see. JT, thank you. Your work is incredible and so needed. Appreciate everything you do. Thank you so much, JT. Tiffany Kim, super chat. Thank you. Loved your integrity calling bars in loved your integrity calling bars in PA. Thanks for sharing your process. A beer on me. Sorry I missed your show. I was watching Sabby. Oh, Tiffany, I went on Sabby for a bit yesterday. She did some good coverage too. And yeah, it's kind of awesome. That's very journalist to well, they're not here. Let's call some bars and see what's going on. I think that's awesome. CBP Film, thank you so much for your super chat. Elections have consequences, and the people that voted for Trump or third party is going to get what they wanted. I rather fight Kamala than a wannabe dictator. If you thought that was bad now, I can see that viewpoint. I know that a lot of people felt that it would be an easier fight under Harris. One thing I would say about that is I felt like sometimes it's more difficult. I see both candidates as accelerationist in that way because one, the horrible things they do gets covered by the media and there's pushback, and the other, which is usually, if there's a Dem president, they don't get very much pushback and we don't hear about what they do. Just like it was never on the news, never mainstream news anywhere that what happened to stop Cop City protesters is one example. Michael Delally, thank you so much for becoming a member. Fight the power. Thank you so much. Timothy, super chat. Thanks for your coverage. Thank you so much, Timothy. Omar, thank you for your super chat. The Dems could have ended Trump 2016 by selecting Bernie, but both parties support special interest moving forward. We need to support Green. I agree. I'm a big proponent of third parties. I am a proponent of running independent, of building third parties. I think even in that aspect, we should avoid any kind of sycophancy and hold any parties that are growing accountable. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to grow a third party. And I think that, Jill Stein got third on the ticket yesterday. You can look at it that way. Third parties, there's a space for that, and we need it. We need to bust up the duopoly in a lot of different ways, any way possible. Is that all of them?
Yep, that was all of them.
All righty. Well, I guess we'll say good night. And everyone, if anyone has hangovers, I hope you're nursing those well. And I guess we'll see where we go from here. It's been a crazy, crazy, crazy election year. And thank you so much for every single person that tuned in. And please become a member.